Hi, I'm Chris's friend Steve. We like to run hills together. Or I run hills, he watches. But anyway, check this out.
It really started in Australia. In the late 90s, there was a bank called Macquarie Bank, which really kind of came up with this. And if you go to Australia today, 60-70% of mortgages are done through the equity optimization model. And then here, Canada, Hong Kong, there are other places that it's quite popular these days because it's actually in the customer's interest. What a unique idea. In America, everything is in the bank's interest. So this actually helps the customer in a big way. So yes, in other countries, it's much more popular.
Alrighty, everyone, this is the Money Peach Podcast. I'm your host, Chris Peach, and I'm going to be bringing on some of the most amazing people I can find so they can tell you how they do their life and their money the right way. My guest on the show today is the one and only Jordan Goodman. He is known as America's Money Answer Man. Now, he has the answers to all different things money, but I wanted him to come on the show for one reason only, and that's because he is going to talk about paying down a 30-year mortgage in 5 to 7 years using your current income. So without further ado, let me bring on Jordan Goodman, America's Money Answer Man. All right, I'm excited. We have Jordan Goodman on the show. He is America's Money Answers Man. Literally, he is the money answers man for America. We're going to talk about that here in a minute. But Jordan, I am excited to have you on the show. So thank you for being here.
Great to be with you, Peach. Really appreciate it, and hopefully going to give a lot of value to the followers here.
Yeah, so if you were looking at the title of this podcast, you notice it said something along the lines of paying off your mortgage in 5 to 7 years. And I mean, this goes completely against mainstream thinking, but this is exactly why I want to have Jordan on the show. I actually was listening. I'm a fellow podcast listener as well. I was listening to Jordan literally 2 years ago, and I heard him talk about this strategy. And it's completely changed my way that I look at mortgages and holding on to them too long and the amount of interest you're going to pay. So to have Jordan on the show is a complete treat for me. And you're going to absolutely get a ton out of this. And I promise you, by the end of the show, you're going to be sharing this episode with everybody you know because you have not heard anything like this before. It's definitely unique, but it's proven. Before we get started, Jordan, I just kind of wanted to go over the history of this. I'm looking at your book here. And so one of the things that's sparked interest is America is definitely a little bit different in mortgages than kind of the rest of the world. Would you agree?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we have deductible interest that nobody else in the world has. That's correct. And many places in the world use this so-called mortgage optimization strategy. And here, a few people know about it, but not that much because the banks have been completely resistant. The banks don't want you to know about this. They love it when you pay interest for 30 years. And they love it even more when you refinance. Say you've been paying on your mortgage for 10 years. And rates have fallen, then you refinance. They love that even more because you've started a new 30-year clock all over again. So a lot of places around the world know about this optimization strategy, but it's still relatively rare in the U.S.
So I was reading through your book and did a little bit of research before this episode. And what I found out that was back in the 20s, there was a small handful of people that had mortgages. I think it was like right around 2% of Americans had mortgages. And you fast forward to the 60s, and now we're at 98% of people have mortgages. So what was that shift? What happened there?
Well, credit became much more available. In the past, credit had only been available to the very, very rich. I mean, credit cards, you think they're like in the Constitution or something. No, credit cards didn't exist before the 1950s. And now everybody has credit cards, and it's made the economy boom because people spend money they don't have. So the same has been true with mortgages. I mean, a lot of it had to do with the securitization of mortgages, which really happened in the 70s, Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Meaning that a mortgage would be made and then it would be packaged with other mortgages sold to investors. So the banks would get their money back and have money to make new mortgages. That really expanded the mortgage market dramatically.
So when did we start seeing this whole 30-year mortgage thing? I mean, if you ask a young person these days, that is the automatic answer is how long do you have a mortgage? 30 years. And it's ingrained in our minds that this is almost the only option these days. If you go away from a 30-year, you're not normal. So where did this come from? How did this magic 30 number get thrown out there?
In the 60s and 70s is really when it started. And it's because the price of homes got up to levels that if you had a shorter term mortgage, the payments came so high that people couldn't afford it. So by stretching it out over 30 years, you get the payments down to allow people to buy homes that they, in the past, just couldn't have it. Now, since the financial crisis, I mean, here we are 10 years from the financial crisis, it's gotten much tougher to get mortgages because of all the Dodd-Frank and other regulations. And you not only have to have a higher credit score, but you also have to have a bigger down payment. Typically, banks want 20% or more. Whereas in the old days, 5%, sometimes even no down payment mortgages. Those don't really happen anymore, which is a good thing because I think a lot of people got into houses they really couldn't afford. The homeownership rate at the peak in about 2006 got up to about 70% of the population. Now it's about 62%, which is probably where it should be. A lot of people were in homes they really couldn't afford.
Gotcha. So one of the things that I remember first being fascinated by is this is not mainstream knowledge. This is not taught in colleges. It's not taught in high school. But just the fact, and you have a much better plan, but just the fact that you can go from a 30 to 15 year. And so most people on the surface will say, well, if you have a 30 year and your payment is $1,800, then it makes sense if you have a 15 year, your payment would be $3,600. And that's just not the truth. Just from a quick standpoint, you ask most people and they're going to, if you did the whole Jay Leno man on the street, you ask that question, be like, yeah, that makes sense. You would double your payment if you went to a 15 year from a 30 to a 15. That's not how it works. Kind of explain why that is so people understand.
Well, it's when you pay off your principal. See, with a 30-year mortgage, the first 10 to almost 15 years, you're paying a very, very small amount of principal, maybe 10% of your principal after 15 years on a 30-year mortgage. With a 15-year mortgage, you're planning to pay principal much sooner, and the whole thing is done in 15 years. So that's why it's not double the interest, because you're actually making progress on the principal with a 15-year mortgage. Now, the payments are going to be higher, but if you can afford it, do that. I'm really big, Peach, on getting out of debt. That's my whole thing. And I mean, the book you talk about is called Master Your Debt, is how to get control of your debt. And I think the biggest debt people have is mortgages. And I really want to encourage people to get out of them as fast as possible. And that's what this whole optimization strategy is about.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, that definitely by far the biggest payment, the biggest purchase people will make in their entire lives is going to be around their mortgage. I think what people don't realize is, if you have a 30-year mortgage and you go out and buy a $300,000 home and you keep it on a 30-year mortgage, meaning you pay 30 years, it blows people's mind when you tell them, this home's cost you close to $600,000. You bought it twice.
Correct.
Like, well,
interest will be the same or more than the purchase price. That's correct. Now, it may shock them, but when they're at the closing table, the HUD-1, as they call it, the document right there is going to say right in black and white, here's the purchase price, here's the mortgage, here's the amount of interest you're going to pay over 30 years. And then they give you an amortization table showing you how slowly you pay off that principal. So nobody wants to look at it, but it's right there in black and white how much you're going to be paying in interest. It's just staggering. And as far as I'm concerned, it's a tremendous waste. If you can pay your mortgage off in 5 to 7 years on your existing level of income instead of 30 years or even 15 years, I'd much rather have that money working for me than working for the bank.
Absolutely. So you're going to tell us how we're going to be able to pay off a mortgage 5 to 7 years. But before we go there, let's just kind of go over some of these ideas that I've heard people mention before in the personal finance space. Is if you go with bi-weekly payments. So instead of making 12 payments, you're going to do 26 half payments. That knocks, a couple years off your mortgage, correct?
2 or 3. So instead of 30, it'll be 27 years, something like that. That's not bad. But basically, as you say, you're making 13 payments a year instead of 12. So it helps a little bit, but it's nothing close to 25 years off your mortgage.
Sure. And then you have the other strategy out there where, I'm going to just at the end of the month, whatever I have left over, I'm going to dump it on there, kind of like an avalanche effect, dump it on the principal only and, slowly pay that down. And yet, like I said, that might, like Jordan just said, 5, maybe 6 years, it knocks off your mortgage if you go down that strategy. And so that's kind of where it ends. So people look at that going, if I go if I'm on a 30-year and I go bi-weekly, it can shave off 2 or 3 years. If I do this avalanche method, I might be able to shave off 5 to 6 years. And then you come along, you say, how about we shave off 25, maybe 23 years of your mortgage? And that's a big difference. My head, everybody just sparked up like, wait a second. Does he just say that not pay off your mortgage in 25 years? No, pay it off 25 years faster. So like 5 to 7 years, we have it paid off. Right?
Correct. On your existing level of income. That's correct. You don't have to have extra income. It's the way you flow it that makes the difference. That's correct.
Okay. So now it's called equity optimization, correct?
That's generically what this strategy is called. That's correct. Mm-hmm.
Okay. And so this is actually a little more popular in countries like Australia and Canada. And
it really started in Australia. In the late 90s, there was a bank called Macquarie Bank, which really kind of came up with this. And if you go to Australia today, 60-70% of mortgages are done through the equity optimization model. And then Canada, Hong Kong, there are other places that it's quite popular these days because it's actually in the customer's interest. What a unique idea. In America, everything is in the bank's interest. So this actually helps the customer in a big way. So yes, in other countries, it's much more popular.
Okay. So, and I think, Jordan, the reason why I connect with you so well, I think we're going to get along well, we get along so well, is just the idea that I like poking at the banks because they have it made, right? They have just been serving
Oh,
themselves
yes.
for decades and decades and decades. The customer is not coming first, they're coming last. And
Correct.
so this is why when I first heard your strategy, I'm like, exactly. So let's go over this. Why don't the banks, so in Australia, you said the banks talking about, but here in America, why aren't the banks talking about this?
Banks love the current situation, which is basically you keep your money sitting in a checking account earning zero. Okay. And then, so the banks have your money for free. And then, as we said, you're paying a 30-year mortgage for many, many years where in fact you're making very, very little progress in the principal. So, it works really well for the banks because they take your money basically and make money on your money. So I'd much rather go the other way around where my money is working for me all the time. But the banks have no incentive. You could go to a bank and say, I'd like to do equity optimization. They'll have no idea what you're talking about. And frankly, they have no interest in finding out what you're talking about because the current system works so well for them. So that's why you haven't heard about it from banks.
Yeah, I think it kind of goes to the less you know, the more they make in a nutshell, right? The less you know,
Exactly.
the more the
and
banks
even more so lately, Peach, because what's happened is interest rates have been rising. And so the Fed Reserve has been raising rates. They raised rates 3 times last year. They're going to probably raise them another 3 times this year. So what that means is the banks are raising what they're charging you on loans, credit cards, student loans, small business loans, car loans, all kinds of things. But they're not raising what they're paying you on deposits. So the bank's profit margins are getting wider as the banks, follow along with the Fed Reserve. So savers are being discriminated against and mortgage holders are being discriminated against, but the bank profits are higher. So that doesn't make me too excited, unless you're a bank shareholder. But for consumers, they're getting it on both ends of the stick here.
Okay, so let's jump into this. I want to talk about how does this equity optimization work. So when I first heard this, Jordan, I remember I was listening to you on a show and you explained it, and I literally had to go back, I think twice, because I was like, I got to fully understand
Only
this.
twice. Normally it takes people 5 times.
So to be honest, I'm gonna really ask probably the same question a few times in different ways because I want to make sure that our listeners not just get it, 100% understand it before the end of the show. So let's go ahead and dive right in. Equity optimization.
So let's contrast equity optimization with the traditional model. The traditional model, as we've said, you take a 30-year mortgage, you have the same payment for 30 years, interest first, and then later you pay off principal. Meanwhile, you keep your money, your paycheck and dividends, interest, all the income you've got in a checking account earning zero. Okay, that's the traditional model. And then when you refinance, you start a new 30-year clock all over again. Equity optimization reverses the whole deal where instead of keeping your money in the bank checking account earning zero, you open what's called a home equity line of credit, or a HELOC for short, which is a liquid line against your house where you can put money in, you can take it out whenever you like. Okay, so it's completely liquid. You can write checks on it. You can have electronic deposits into it or out of it, whenever you need access to that money. You keep your income, which is normally sitting in that checking account, in the HELOC, and it's pushing down your balance every day. HELOCs are based on what's called average daily balance. How much do you owe today? All right. So that money is pushing that balance down. And ideally, you'd have all your bills on one credit card. Hopefully you get frequent flyer miles or some kind of a benefit from it. And you pay, in effect, one bill a month. So your utilities and food and everything is on that one card. So every day that you put money into that HELOC, you're making balance progress, you might say. And then one day a month, the balance goes up when you pay your bill out of the HELOC using a check or electronic payment that way. So every month that goes by, literally, your payment is going down because you're owing less interest on less principal, and you pay the HELOC off. Now you combine the HELOC with your first in what's called the blended strategy, and that's the way you pay off your first. So let me just do a simple example, Peach, about how this might work, all right?
One quick question. Okay, so for those of you who are thinking about, you open up a HELOC, it's a line of credit against your home. Before you do that, though, you would have to have equity in your home, correct?
Correct. I mean, I'll tell you, there are 3 things you need to make the strategy work. You got to have equity in your house, because if you're underwater, there's nothing to borrow against. So you have to have equity in your house. Don't have to have a lot of equity, but some.
Okay.
You have to have a decent credit score, maybe 680 or higher, to be able to qualify for the HELOC. And the third thing you need is positive cash flow, more money coming in than going out during the month, because that positive cash flow is what's pushing that balance down and giving you progress. The more positive cash flow you have, the faster it gets paid down. But I bet the vast majority of your followers have those three things, so this would be appropriate for them. But if you're in negative cash flow, you got a terrible credit record, and you have no equity in your house, this is not going to work for you.
Real quick, equity. How much equity? Can you give us a percentage or a ballpark in that range?
Small amount, 10,000. I mean, a small amount of equity. All you need is enough to be able to get that HELOC. And that HELOC is one that feeds your first. And I'll go through the example of how that works. So you don't need a lot of equity, just enough to be able to get a HELOC. All right, so let me give you an example. So say you had a house worth $300,000, and say you had a really good first mortgage on it for $200,000. All right, say at 4%. It had a good rate. You're not giving up your first; you're just paying it off faster. All right, so you've got $100,000 in equity. So you would say get a $50,000 HELOC. All right, so you haven't used it yet; you just opened it up. You would then write a check on that $50,000 HELOC towards your first. You paid your first down now from $200,000 to $150,000, and you owe $50,000 on the HELOC, right?
So you just took your debt and you moved it from inside the mortgage into the HELOC.
Correct.
Okay.
So now you owe $50,000 on the HELOC and $150,000 on the first. So now during the next 9 months, a year, however long it may be, you keep income in that HELOC, pushing that $50,000 principal down every day. Just a super simple example. Say you have a $1,000 paycheck. Instead of keeping in the checking account earning nothing, you put the $1,000 into the HELOC. Instead of owing $50,000, you owe $49,000. So you're paying interest on $49,000 instead of $50,000 because that money just pushed your balance down. HELOCs are based average daily balance. How much do you owe today? Okay.
Gotcha.
So during a year, and say it takes you a year to pay that $50,000 off. Again, if you have more positive cash flow, it's going to be off faster. But just say for argument's sake, it's a year. So now that $50,000 is down to zero. Now you do it again. You write another $50,000 check on the HELOC towards the first, on which you've made almost no progress in the year. So you go from 150 to 100 on the first, right? You pay your HELOC off over the next year, do the strategy. You do it twice more. So after 4 years, you've paid off your first. You now have $50,000 on the HELOC. You pay the HELOC off, and in 5 years, you are now mortgage free. Your money is working for you every day by pushing that balance down, you see, as opposed to keeping it in the checking account earning nothing. There's a free website you can actually model this for your own situation, which is called truthinequity.com. And what they do, you'll put in the numbers that apply to your situation. Here's the value of my house. Here's my first mortgage. Here's my income. Here's my expenses. And they're going to say, okay, based on what you're doing today, it's going to be 28 and a half years before you pay off your mortgage, whatever it comes out to be. And based on the numbers you just gave us, it'll be 6.3 years, whatever it is. And then step by step, they show you exactly how to do it. And you can see each month what kind of interest you're going to pay, what kind of principal you're going to pay. And then if you have extra, say your cash flow goes up for whatever, and you get a raise or a bonus or something, you can put that right in there and you'll see how much faster you pay your mortgage off. So you're now in control instead of being a victim of this huge 30-year mortgage that looks like it's never going to be paid off. And you're saving interest every month at a faster and faster rate. So that's a very oversimplified example of how mortgage optimization can literally pay you off in about 5 years.
Okay, so the question I have here then, a couple things. So let's use your example. I like that example. We have a $300,000 home. We only owe $200 on it. We have the $100,000 equity. So I get that line of credit. I take a $50,000 line, okay?
Right.
But then what I do is I go to my line of credit, my checkbook. You get a checkbook with your line of credit. I write a check out for $50,000 to the principal of my mortgage, my first mortgage, and I put it on there. And basically what that does is it takes $50,000 away from the first mortgage and it just moves it into the HELOC. So I have the same debt level. It's moved around. Okay, perfect. Got that.
Correct.
I understand that part. All right. So now we have this $50,000 in there. And so now I get my paycheck. Let's just say it's $1,000, $1,000. So I get that check. Instead of it going into my regular checking account, I throw it into my HELOC. Correct?
Correct.
And now it's $49,000. So it's paid it down $1,000. I understand that part. But I still have a mortgage payment on my.
Correct.
And it's the same. It didn't, even though I paid it down by $50,000, my mortgage payment, let's just say it's $1,500 a month.
Correct.
Okay.
You have the same mortgage payment, but notice that more of that mortgage payment is going to principal on the first as well, because you're now paying on a $150,000 mortgage instead of $200,000, right? So more of that $1,500 payment is paying down the principal on the first. So you're making progress on the principal both on the first and on the HELOC at the same time.
So the next question I have then, that makes sense. The mortgage payment stays the same, but more of it's going to principal because the interest is based on the balance of the principal.
Correct.
Which makes sense. So now I just created a HELOC payment. How am I handling that?
It's going to be one of your bills automatically. I mean, a HELOC will hit your HELOC. You'll pay it through your HELOC. It's a regular bill that you have. And typically that's going to be lower. In this case, it's a bill on $50,000 that you've borrowed against the HELOC. And then if you keep that balance moving down, every month that HELOC payment's going to go down because you're paying less interest on less principal. And it's also the interest rate's going to be very similar to what you have in your first. My example was a 4% mortgage on the first. The HELOCs are based on the prime rate. The prime rate today is 4.5, so it may be 4.5 or something like that. So the interest rate's going to be very similar, but the difference is you're making progress on the principal every day on the HELOC, whereas you're making almost no progress on the principal on the first once a month.
So it sounds like one of the biggest separators here with a mortgage, the interest is based on the balance from day 1 to day 30 for the whole month, and interest inside the HELOC is looking at it every single day.
It's what they call average daily balance. That's exactly right. Mm-hmm.
This is where it really came to fruition for me, is when I looked at this and said, okay, if you pay off, if you don't go through this HELOC strategy and you just were to say you get a $10,000 check and you're like, I don't need this $10,000, I'm going to throw it to the mortgage balance, you actually don't see the effect of that on your interest until the following month because it's monthly, correct?
Yeah, but I mean, the result of that, if you put extra principal towards your mortgage, it'll actually benefit you like in 27 years or something like that, a very, very long time that it'll cut the payoff of your mortgage. Right. Meanwhile, you don't have access to that money. Right. A mortgage is what I call a one-way mousetrap. You put money in, but you can't get it out. You can't write a check on your mortgage. Right. Whereas with the HELOC, it's a two-way mousetrap. You can put money in, you can take it out. That liquidity makes all the difference in the world. It's helping you right now. Your principal is going down every day, and therefore your payment is going down every day because you owe less interest on less principal. If you throw extra principal at your first mortgage, it's not affecting your payment. And it's affecting your payoff way down the road, 25 years from now or some long, long time. And meanwhile, it's cut your cash flow. That $10,000 you put into the first, you can't get back. Okay? So that's why that strategy doesn't really help very much.
Hey guys, Chris Peach here. Hey, did you know Andrew and I were once living paycheck to paycheck and we had racked up $52,000 in consumer debt in only 4 years of marriage? Yeah, we were normal until we hit rock bottom. You see, since that moment, we decided to stop borrowing money, stop using credit cards, pay with cash, and then we did the unthinkable and we paid off $52,000 in only 7 months. Sounds crazy, right? Well, maybe not as crazy as working nonstop to send all of our money to the bank in the form of payments. Here's the deal. I'm hosting a free workshop where I share our story and I show you the same step-by-step method to going from broke to debt-free and then on to building wealth. So head on over to moneypeach.com/workshop to grab your spot in this free online training that I promise you are going to absolutely love. Once again, that's moneypeach.com/workshop.
Yeah, I think people are so cautious to throw any extra money towards their principal on your mortgage because you don't get that money. You can't get that back. If there's an emergency or something happens, it's
right.
It's
not liquid.
It's not liquid.
That's
so
correct.
That makes
Whereas with a HELOC, if say you had that $10,000, throw that into your HELOC and pay it off even faster. Right. So if you have extra money in any way, you get a commission or a bonus or something like that. Put it into your HELOC, and that's going to push the balance down that day. You've immediately made progress by $10,000 that day that you put it in there. It's helping you right now as opposed to 27 years from now.
That makes sense. So then the next thing is you're talking about all of your expenses, your gas, your groceries, everything is going on, just make it simple, going on one credit card, going on one payment method, okay? And then when that bill is due at the end of the month, you're going to pay it in full with your home equity line of credit. So that's the one day a month that the balance will actually go back up.
Correct. Every other day of the month, you're making progress. That one day, the balance goes up. That's correct. You do have to pay your bills. But you see how you're really making progress in a way that otherwise you're not making any progress, right? So what a difference. What a difference.
It's a huge difference. And I look at this strategy because there's people listening right now that are thinking, this is so revolutionary the way of thinking because, you hear a lot of the gurus out there that are saying, oh, you should never use a HELOC. And in some aspects, if you're misbehaving with money, don't use this strategy. If you have no discipline, don't use this strategy because it sounds like you have to have some discipline here, correct?
Well, I would agree with that. And this is a way of making huge progress on your principal. But if you then go blow the principal on a fancy Caribbean vacation or something, that's not a good way to use it. So I would agree with you. You need some discipline. But if you have your eye on what the result of this is, most people are very disciplined at it. Say you're a new couple at 35, okay, and you just bought a home, and you paid your mortgage off by 40 instead of 65. What a difference in your life that's going to make, right? And then after you're 40 and after you're mortgage free, then go and spend your money on all kinds of things, or frankly, invest it. So now instead of paying all that interest, you're going to be having your investment accounts growing, which you're going to need because you're going to live a long time. In the book, I actually have a table on page 76 and 77, actually showing the difference. In this case, I have a 15-year mortgage, $225,000 mortgage. Where during the 15 years, you'll pay $100,000 in interest over the 15 years. It takes you 15 years to pay it off. Using this strategy, all the numbers being the same, you pay it off in 5 years and pay about $22,000 interest. In that example, you're saving $78,000 in interest and 10 years off your mortgage. That's enough to make a lot of people disciplined. They can see the golden ring right in front of them there.
Yeah, I'm in your book right now. So page 76, it does have, it's laid out, year by year to the penny. Talk about your payment and what that looks like in terms of, So
notice the payment stays the same, $1,808.72 every year, all the way through. You're making very little progress in the principal until finally at the end you do. Notice on the other side, when you're doing optimization, the payment starts at $643 a month and then goes down to $582. And after 5 years, it goes to zero. Your payment is going down every month as you pay your debt off at an accelerating rate until it goes to zero. That's what just blows people away. How can I be paying less and less and paying it off at a faster rate? It's because you're paying less interest on less principal.
So the losers here are the banks.
Absolutely. I'm happy about that. The banks are doing just fine. I'm no crocodile tears for the banks at all here. But again, banks don't want you to know about these kind of things. They love the current system where you pay interest for a very, very long time. That's why I always say the banks have the biggest buildings in town, because it's all your interest that built those buildings.
Yeah, every tall building or every football stadium is somehow named after a bank or some way through there. All right.
And where do they get the money from that? From you.
Yeah, from your double mortgage or from buying two houses for one, right? Paying two houses for one. So I'm looking here. I want to get my mind around this, and I want everybody listening who's driving in their car or at the gym or wherever they're at, I want them to just fully understand this before we move on to the next topic. So I'm going to just go through it real quick, and then along the way, tell me if I'm on the right track or off the right track.
Okay.
I'm going to use me as an example. So my wife, Andrea, and I, let's say here in Phoenix, Arizona, we have a $250,000 home, which is a pretty standard home here, okay? We have a 30-year mortgage, and we'll say we're 7 years into this mortgage, and with the equity in our home, we have $100,000, okay? So we owe $150,000 on a $250,000 home. And so the first question I have is, if somebody's going to go out there and get a home equity line of credit, they don't necessarily have to have paid down that much equity. Their house could have went up in value, and that could be the equity, correct?
Correct. The equity can be you've paid it down, or the value of its they're going to do an appraisal to see what the value of the house is. So in your case, the house is worth $250,000, you owe $150,000, so you have $100,000 in equity. Whether it was you paying it down or the value of it increasing doesn't really matter. Either way, you have $100,000 equity. Gotcha.
Okay, perfect. So you get the appraisal on your house. They say you have $100,000 in equity, no matter which way you wanted to get there, but we have $100,000. Now, I'm going to throw a little more caution in the wind. I'm not ready to go put $100,000 line of credit because this is brand new. So I'm going to do 30.
You can't do that anyway.
Okay.
The HELOC companies are not going to give you 100%, maximum 80% maybe.
Okay.
But I'm just being conservative. You have $100,000 equity. Do a $50,000 HELOC.
Okay, $50,000 HELOC. So
yep.
I get the checks in the mail that say, line of credit on it. So I know when I'm writing this check, it's coming out of the line of credit for the bank against whoever I have the HELOC with. So I'm going to write a check, or I can go online, however you want to do it. Write a check just sounds, I think that visualize it better. And I'm going to send the check off to, we'll just say that my mortgage is with Wells Fargo. Okay. Send it over to Wells Fargo. So now the balance, I owed $150,000. Now it's showing the balance is $100,000, right?
Correct.
So let's say my payment was $1,500 a month. So now that my balance is $100,000, I have a $1,500 payment. The payment stays the same. However, I'm just going to throw some generic numbers out there. Instead of $1,200 going to principal and $300 going to interest out of that $1,500, we might be looking at like an $800, $700 split, correct? We're getting closer
to
principal.
Chances are it's the other way around. I mean, you gave an awful lot to principal. If you've
I'm sorry,
if you're 7 years into it,
okay, perfect. Yeah. So
I would reverse that to some extent. You're going to pay a lot more in interest and less in principal.
I'm paying $1,200 to interest, only $300 to principal. Now that
that's more like
that this balance is down to $100,000, so the interest rate, we'll just use 4.5% as an interest rate. So it's saying, okay, the balance is $100,000, so we're going to charge you 4% amortized. So that looks like maybe our principal amount each month went from $300 to $800 just in that move.
Exactly, something like so. The same $1,500 payment is much more going towards principal because now you owe $100 instead of $150. You got
Makes perfect sense. So now I think where people are getting a little jittery, they're like, okay, this sounds great, but Chris, we have this $50,000 balance in our HELOC. And so technically, you got to realize here, you didn't create more debt for yourself. You just moved it. So you have $50,000 sitting in this HELOC. And so, but there's going to be a monthly payment attached to that. But our income is not going into our checking account. Our income is going into the HELOC, which is more than enough to cover that minimum payment due each month because it's our income.
That's all you owe. HELOCs for the first 5, if not 10 years, are interest only. So the only thing you have to pay is the interest, which is going to be pretty minimal on $50,000. So I don't know what it would be a month, but that's all you have to pay. But you're paying a lot more by having your income in there all the time, making progress towards that principal.
Okay, this is where the light bulb just went off right now, because earlier in the example, we were paying, say, $1,200 in interest, right, to the bank. And now we're not paying that $1,200, and we are paying some interest to the HELOC, but it's interest on $50,000, which is going to be, so you are still paying interest. You just lowered your interest amount, or the amount the bank gets from, in this example, we'll say from $1,200, maybe down to like $100.
That's right. So you're paying less interest. So that's really good. But the most important thing is you're paying your principal off faster. You're making progress every day on your principal. With your first, you made almost no progress. You've been paying it for 7 years, and you've made almost no progress, some, but minimal progress against the principal. That's the key thing.
Okay, the light bulb has gone off. I 100% understand it now. And here's what I like is I'm the money guy in the house. I like talking about numbers and spreadsheets. And my wife is, hey, opposites attract. We'll just say that. And so this is what I love, Jordan, is the way you have explained it and the way you have explained it to me personally. But my wife is going to listen to this and say, I get it. I get it. So here's a personal situation that I'm going to ask for your advice on, because I think a lot of us can relate.
Okay.
I wish I would have heard this podcast, or I wish I would have known this 7 years ago, because since 2011, we have been rapidly paying down our mortgage the old-fashioned way, which has just been throwing extra principal. And so we owe about $90,000 on our mortgage. So right now, if we look,
still do this, it's just going to make it that much faster. I mean, you've made some progress, but all the money you put in that extra principal, you can't get back out.
Right?
That is true. Helped you some.
That is true.
But this would be much, much, much faster.
So I look at this though, and I go, okay, right now, if I look at my mortgage statement, I'm making a ton of progress towards principal because the balance is so low, right? But you're saying I could even make more progress by using the interest on a HELOC versus the interest left over on the mortgage. Is that correct?
That's correct. You're getting all your income. Right? Think of how much you keep in your checking and savings accounts, however much that is. It's sitting there doing nothing for you. Every day, that money is working for you, pushing down the principal. Every day. Okay, that's a huge difference in your life.
The money sitting in my checking account is doing something. It's helping the banks loan out money.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. That's not my interest. I want to help your followers. I want to help your listeners, not the banks. I have very little sympathy for the banks. They're just making tons of money on exactly this. They get your money for free. And by the way, this is good not only on your individual home that you live in, but you can use this for investment property. Say you have rental property. Okay, you get a HELOC on that, and the rent you're getting from your tenants is paying your, in effect, commercial mortgage off faster as well. So those properties become free and clear in 5 years instead of 30 years. So I just made your rental properties that much more profitable as well.
Well, this actually helps out even more in a rental situation because commercial loan is going to be higher than your primary residence loan. So you're going to be paying you're even having more of a bang for your buck because you're using that same HELOC.
Correct. Isn't this powerful stuff? It's just amazing. And it is a mind shift. And I've seen this many times. People kind of like, how does that work? And then there's a certain point, it's like, I get it. And after they started doing it, they become evangelists for it because you've been wasting your money for all these years. You know, the banks have people looking at the wrong thing. They say, oh, here's what your interest rate and here's what your payment's going to be. And we can save you all this money by lowering your interest rate and payment if rates have fallen, you refinance. What they don't say is how fast or how slowly you pay off your principal. When you do a refinance, which people do all the time, yes, your payment and your mortgage rate is down, but you've just thrown away tens of thousands of dollars of interest you paid on your previous mortgage at a higher rate, and you're starting all over again. So the banks have you looking the wrong way. You'd never ask, how fast do I pay off my principal? And they say, well, 30 years. It's like, oh, great. And what is the total amount of interest? Exactly what you said, like double what the price of the house was. So it's a revolutionary thing.
Jordan, you may be America's money answers man, but I can see literally pictures of you being posted all over the inside of banks saying America's most wanted man by the banking industry.
I would be proud to do that, actually. This
is a game changer for so many people. And the reason why, we talked about this, the reason why I wanted to go back and forth, because we're not talking about saving hundreds of dollars. We're not talking about saving thousands of dollars. In essence, we're talking about saving hundreds of thousands of dollars, right? If you have a $300,000 mortgage and it's going to cost you $600,000 to own it in the banking world, and you could own it for $300,000 and maybe $320, $330 in that range. We're not talking about saving $50 here. We're talking about saving $100,000 plus. This is so important that I got to make sure everybody understands.
The bigger your house and the bigger your mortgage, the more you're going to save. Okay, so if you're in California with $1 million house or something, it could save you $500,000 or so. Now you have to have the cash flow to make that work. Okay, we go back to our 3 requirements. But if you've got it, it can literally save you several hundreds of thousands of dollars on your mortgage. And then I want people to take that money that they're saving and have it invested for themselves. So do an index fund or do something where the money's going to be growing for you instead of sitting in the bank earning nothing. This can allow people to fund their retirement. There's so many people getting to retirement would have almost nothing saved or very, very little saved. Again, if your mortgage is paid off like by age 40, I've now given you 25 years you would have been paying interest that you can be growing your retirement funds through index funds or some kind of worthwhile investment.
And like Jordan says, it compounds. So if you pay off your mortgage that much quicker, the reason why is because you are compounding that over time. The reverse is also true. When you save earlier, it compounds over time. There's a reason why you meet so many people who are in their 40s and 50s and say, if I only knew what I know now at 18, I'd be a multimillionaire, right? Because time
is a wonderful thing, but there's what I call positive and negative compounding. Positive compounding is the money you make is reinvested and makes more money. Negative compounding is you're paying more and more interest as it keeps piling up against you and you get further and further in the hole. I want people to live in a positive compounding instead of a negative compounding world, and it makes a huge, huge difference in your life.
Jordan, this is awesome. So we're coming up to the end of the show here. I have a couple questions I'm going to ask you, and then I want to talk about where we can find out more about you, where we can get your book. And right. I know you put together something for the Money Peach listeners. Really appreciate that. But so this is going to be a funny question because I think I already know the answer. But the first question I'm going to ask is if you could give away one book for the rest of your life, right? If there's one book that you recommend everybody read, what would that one book be and why? And I think I know the answer.
Well, the book that talks about this is called Master Your Debt. And there's a website related to it, master-yourdebt.com, that goes into all that, but not promoting my own stuff. I would say one of the Tony Robbins books would be, one of the best ones out there because he motivates you in how to make the most of your money. A lot of this is about psychology, not about the numbers. And, any of the Tony Robbins books I would recommend. I
agree. I just finished Unshakable.
Yes.
Completely changed my way that it actually changes the way I talk to investor or talk to my advisor now. So that was number one. Okay. The second question I have for you is on the home screen of your phone, what is that picture of on your phone when you open it up?
I just have all of my apps there. I don't have a picture, actually. It's just like a background. I don't have a picture. I should probably have a picture of my son, who's 28, who works at Airbnb in San Francisco. That's what I probably should have. But that's just the honest truth. It's the background with all the apps.
We're going to make you a screen that says America's or the bank's most wanted man. And it's going to have
most wanted man. I would love
that. We're going to make that for you. We'll have one of our VAs send that over. So awesome. Okay. So now people are listening. They're hooked. They're like, you know what? I want to save hundreds of thousands of dollars. Not as a joke. Like they're seriously thinking that. Like I would like to save that much money. Where can we find more about Jordan Goodman?
My website is moneyanswers.com, and we've actually made up a special landing page for your listeners, which is www.moneyanswersman.com/moneypeach. And I've got various offers for them of all kinds of things. I do a monthly newsletter, all kinds of good things for them. So go to that website, moneyanswersman.com/moneypeach, and you'll see the special thing I've done just for your listeners.
Yeah, so that's moneyanswersman.com/moneypeach. We'll have links in the show notes to this. And so just for you guys listening out there, Jordan is not just the mortgage expert, right? He talks all things money. That's why it's called moneyanswers.com, right? Not just one answer, it's multiple answers. So he has
multiple answers.
He has more to talk about than just mortgages. But that was what I wanted him to come on the show for, and he was gracious enough to come on. So Jordan, I just want to say thank you. This has been an absolute pleasure. This has probably been one of the interviews for me that it clicked while you were talking. While we were talking back and forth, something clicked even more for me. That doesn't happen very often. And I'm just blessed to have you on the show. I just want to say thank you from the bottom of my heart and from our listeners' heart, because what you're teaching here is going to change not just people's lives now, but when they're gone, it's going to change their legacies. Like their children's children are going to be changed because they got out of mortgage debt. They didn't spend 30 years paying the bank. They spent 5 to 7. That's
correct. And have all that money work for them and their estate instead of the bank's estate. Absolutely. So it feels really great. I really appreciate you having me on the show, and hopefully really affected a lot of people in the positive way. Again, I'm glad to take emails about these things as well at moneyanswers.com. And again, a website that can go into this in much more detail we talked about is truthinequity.com. So I really hope we've made a real difference in your listeners' lives.
I'm sure you have. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Jordan.
Thank you, Peach.
And just like that, we wrap up another amazing episode of the Money Peach podcast. All the show notes, the links, anything that Jordan and I talked about can be found over at moneypeach.com/session92. That's moneypeach.com/session92. Special thanks goes out to my producer, Steve Stewart, and my assistant, Kayla Sloan. Without them, this show would not be possible. Thank you guys so much for listening, and we'll see you next week. Boom, da-ba-doom. Boom, da-ba-doom.